July 11th, 1943. 3:47 a.m., Gela, Sicily. Major General Terry della Mesa Allen stood in the rubble of what used to be a coastal villa, a half-smoked cigarette dangling from his lips, watching German panzer tanks roll toward his position. The 1st Infantry Division, his division, had been on Italian soil for less than 8 hours. Already they were surrounded. Behind him, 34. American soldiers who'd never seen real combat. In front of him, the Hermann Göring Panzer Division, the most decorated tank unit in the Wehrmacht. His artillery was still on the boats. His anti-tank guns were buried in sand 3 miles down the beach, and General Feldmarschall Kesselring had just committed every available tank within 50 miles to push the Americans back into the Mediterranean. The German tanks were 2 miles out and closing. Terry Allen flicked his cigarette into the dust and smiled. It was the kind of smile that made his own staff officers nervous. Before we continue with Terry Allen's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Gela, Sicily, where Terry Allen was about to prove why the Germans had put a price on his head. Terry della Mesa Allen was born in Fort Douglas, Utah, in 1888, the son of a career Army officer. He should have been the perfect West Point graduate, disciplined, by the book, respectful of authority. Instead, he was nearly expelled twice for insubordination, graduated near the bottom of his class, and spent his first 15 years in the army being passed over for promotion because superior officers found him difficult to control. He was short, 5'7" in his boots, with a boxer's build and a face that looked like it had stopped too many punches. He spoke with a Texas drawl he'd picked up at Fort Sam Houston, drank too much, swore constantly, and had a habit of showing up to staff meetings wearing a battered campaign hat instead of his regulation officer's cap. He called his soldiers "my boys," and they called him Terrible Terry, sometimes to his face. In 1917, he deployed to France with the 90th Division. Within 3 months, he'd been wounded twice, promoted to major, and awarded the Silver Star for personally leading a night raid that captured 112 German soldiers. The citation mentioned that he'd violated direct orders to stay in the command post. His commanding officer recommended both the medal and a court-martial. The medal went through. The court-martial didn't. By 1940, Terry Allen was a 52-year-old colonel going nowhere. The Army's young modernizers, Eisenhower, Bradley, Patton, were getting divisions and corps commands. Allen was stuck training National Guard units in upstate New York. He drank more. He argued with everyone. His efficiency reports used words like insubordinate, uncooperative, so and unlikely to advance further. Then Pearl Harbor happened. Suddenly, the Army needed officers who could turn civilians into soldiers in 6 months. They needed men who didn't care about peacetime regulations and parade ground discipline. They needed someone who could take 16 Southern men who'd never fired a rifle in anger and turn them into an assault division capable of hitting a defended beach. In March 1942, Terry Allen was given command of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red one, and told to make them ready for combat in North Africa by November. 8 months. It wasn't enough time. He did it in 7, but North Africa taught Terry Allen something the textbooks at West Point never mentioned. Modern war wasn't won by following the plan. It was won by the side that adapted faster when the plan collapsed, and every plan collapsed. Between November 1942 and May 1943, the 1st Infantry Division fought in 11 major engagements across Tunisia. They learned how to fight Germans the hard way, by fighting Germans. And they learned that American doctrine, developed in peacetime war games in Louisiana, didn't work against Afrika Korps veterans who'd been fighting since 1940. The Army Field Manual said infantry divisions should maintain defensive positions and coordinate with armor. Terry Allen ignored it. He kept his division moving, hitting German supply lines, withdrawing before counterattacks could develop, attacking again from a different direction. The manual said division commanders should stay at headquarters and direct operations by radio. Allen was usually somewhere on the front line, close enough to hear the gunfire, making decisions based on what he saw instead of what staff officers told him. And the manual said American soldiers should maintain proper military discipline at all times. Terry Allen let his men wear whatever combinations of uniform and captured equipment they wanted. Let them skip saluting in forward areas. Let them paint unit insignias on their helmets and vehicles. His division looked like pirates. They fought like demons. Captain Marcus Stevenson, 16th Infantry Regiment, wrote home in April 1943. The old man showed up at our position during a firefight yesterday. No helmet, smoking a cigarette, standing up in the middle of incoming mortar fire, asking if we had enough ammunition. Half the guys think he's crazy. The other half would follow him into hell. By May 1943, when the Afrika Korps surrendered, the 1st Infantry Division had taken more casualties than any other American division in theater. They'd also captured more enemy soldiers, taken more ground, and earned more decorations. And they had a reputation. German intelligence reports identified them as particularly aggressive and warned units to expect unorthodox tactics and immediate counterattack. Terry Allen's superiors noticed too. General Omar Bradley, commanding the II Corps, wrote in his efficiency report, "General Allen has transformed the 1st Division into a highly effective combat force. His methods are unconventional and occasionally troubling, but his results are undeniable." The last sentence would prove more important than Bradley intended. Now Sicily. The plan for Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, was developed by staff officers who'd never commanded troops in combat. It was a perfect plan, detailed, coordinated, precise. 3 divisions would hit beaches along an 80-mile front. Naval gunfire would suppress coastal defenses. Paratroopers would secure inland objectives. Armor would punch through and capture the ports. The whole operation would take 72 hours. The 1st Infantry Division would land at Gela, a small port on the southern coast, secure the beachhead, and wait for armor support before advancing. Simple, clean, by the book. Terry Allen read the plan and knew it was garbage. He'd been fighting Germans for 8 months. He knew what would happen. The naval bombardment would be ineffective. The paratroopers would miss their drop zones. The armor would get stuck on the beaches, and the Germans would counterattack immediately with everything they had, because that's what Germans always did. He couldn't change the plan. That came from Allied headquarters in Algiers, but he could ignore parts of it. 3 weeks before the invasion, Allen called a meeting of his regimental commanders in an olive grove outside Bizerte. No staff officers, no notes, no records. "Gentlemen," he said, "the plan says we secure the beach and wait for armor. We're not doing that. The instant we hit that beach, we push inland as fast as we can move. We take the high ground. We take the road junctions. We take anything the Germans might use to set up a defensive line. And we do it before they can organize a counterattack." Colonel George Taylor, commanding the 16th Infantry, asked the obvious question. "Sir, what about coordination with the 45th Division? What about waiting for tank support? The 45th will do what they do. We'll do what we do. And we don't wait for anything. The first unit that stops moving becomes a target. Questions?" There were no questions. They'd learned not to question Terry Allen. He was usually right. On the night of July 9th, 1943, the 1st Infantry Division loaded into landing craft and headed for Sicily. Allen was in the lead boat, standing next to the coxswain, watching the coast through binoculars. He was 55 years old. He'd been in the army for 37 years. He was about to commit his division to an unsupported attack against prepared German positions in direct violation of operational orders because he believed the official plan would get his men killed. The landing craft hit the beach at 2:45 a.m. German machine gun fire cut through the darkness, tracers making green lines in the air. The ramps dropped. Men poured out into waist-deep water. Some went down immediately, others made it to the sand. Allen was third off his boat, walking up the beach like he was inspecting a training exercise, water dripping from his uniform, cigarette still lit. By 4:00 a.m., the 1st Division had taken Gela and pushed a mile inland. They'd taken 247 casualties. The plan called for them to stop and consolidate. Instead, Terry Allen ordered the advance to continue. By dawn, his forward elements were 4 miles from the beach, occupying a ridgeline that overlooked the coastal highway. At 6:30 a.m., German reconnaissance aircraft spotted the American positions. At 7:15, the counterattack began. The Hermann Göring Panzer Division hit the American lines with 60 tanks, supported by mechanized infantry and artillery. They came up the coastal highway in a column, expecting to find scattered infantry still organizing on the beaches. Instead, they ran into prepared defensive positions on the high ground. But prepared positions without anti-tank weapons don't stop Panzerviehs. Lieutenant Colonel William Darby, commanding the 1st Ranger Battalion attached to Allen's division, watched the tanks roll forward and knew they were in trouble. His men had rifles, machine guns, and hand grenades. The German tanks had 75 limited cannons and 3 inches of armor plate. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Then the naval gunfire started. Terry Allen had done something else that wasn't in the plan. Before the invasion, he'd met with Rear Admiral Alan Kirk, commanding the Naval Fire Support Group, and worked out a system. Allen's forward observers would be on the same radio frequency as the destroyers offshore. When they called for fire, they'd get it immediately. No requests through channels, no approval from Corps headquarters. No coordination delays. It wasn't proper procedure. It violated naval doctrine. It bypassed the entire chain of command. It saved the 1st Infantry Division. The USS Boise, a light cruiser positioned 3 miles offshore, dropped 6-inch shells onto the German column. The first salvo destroyed 2 tanks. The second hit a fuel truck, creating a fireball visible from the beach. The German advance staggered, stopped, tried to deploy off the road. More destroyers joined the bombardment. Within 15 minutes, the Hermann Göring Division had lost 18 tanks and pulled back to regroup. But they came again at 9:00 a.m., this time spreading out across a wider front, moving faster, trying to get close enough to American positions that naval gunfire couldn't target them without hitting friendly forces. Terry Allen was at an observation post on the ridge when the second attack developed. Major General Clarence Hubner, his assistant division commander, was next to him. Through binoculars, they watched German tanks advance across open ground toward American positions. "We can't stop them," Hubner said. "Not without armor." Allen lowered his binoculars. "We're not stopping them. We're killing them." He'd already given the orders. Every artillery piece the division had landed was being moved forward. Every anti-tank gun that made it off the boats was being hauled up the ridge by hand. And every infantryman who could carry a bazooka was being sent to positions where they could hit the German tanks from the flanks. It wasn't combined arms doctrine. It was improvisation, desperation, making it up as they went. It worked. The German tanks pushed to within 800 yards of American lines before the killing started. Bazookas from concealed positions knocked out the lead vehicles. Artillery caught the following tanks in the open: Naval gunfire continued to hammer anything that tried to withdraw. By 11:00 a.m., the Hermann Göring Division had lost 36 tanks and pulled back again. They didn't try a third time. But that wasn't the story. That was just Tuesday. What made Terry Allen different, what made him Terrible Terry, wasn't that he won the battle at Gela. Other American commanders won battles. Patton was already racing across Sicily, grabbing headlines and glory. Bradley was methodically reducing German positions in the center. Terry Allen won battles by convincing 16 Zuozera ordinary soldiers that they were individually capable of doing impossible things. And he did it by doing impossible things himself, constantly in front of them, until they believed it was normal. Between July 11th and August 17th, 1943, the 1st Infantry Division fought continuously across Sicily. They were always in the front, always attacking. Allen refused to rotate units to the rear for rest. When subordinate commanders complained that their men were exhausted, he showed up personally, walking the lines, talking to soldiers, making it clear that he was more exhausted than they were and had no intention of stopping. He slept 4 hours a night, usually in a jeep or a ditch. He ate 1 meal a day, whatever his men were eating. When division headquarters established a command post in captured buildings, Allen stayed outside, in a tent. When staff officers suggested he was taking unnecessary risks by visiting forward positions, he ignored them, and his men noticed. They saw their general living the same life they lived. They saw him in the same danger. They heard him make the same jokes about army food and the same complaints about heat and dust, and they decided that if Terrible Terry could do it, they could do it. Private First Class Robert Wagner, 18th Infantry Regiment from Akron, Ohio, wrote in his diary, "General Allen came through our position today. He looked like hell, unshaven, dirty uniform, smoking. He asked if we had water. We said no. He gave us his canteen and walked away. That's our general. That's the big red one." But that same quality, the thing that made his soldiers love him, made his superiors want him gone. The problem with Terry Allen, from the Army's perspective, was that he commanded personal loyalty instead of institutional obedience. His division followed him, not the chain of command. When orders came from Corps headquarters that Allen thought were stupid, he ignored them or interpreted them creatively. When staff officers from higher headquarters visited the 1st Division, they were treated with polite contempt. The big red ones saw themselves as Terry Allen's division, not part of 2 Corps or 7th Army or anything else. General Omar Bradley watched this with growing concern. Bradley believed in systems, in doctrine, in the importance of interchangeable parts. Divisions should operate the same way regardless of who commanded them. Officers should be respected because of their rank, not their personality. Soldiers should follow orders because orders came from legitimate authority. Terry Allen represented everything Bradley distrusted. He was irreplaceable. His division functioned only because he led it. If he was killed or transferred, the 1st Division would lose effectiveness, possibly collapse. That made him a weakness in the system, not a strength. On August 7, 1943, Bradley sent a message to Eisenhower's headquarters recommending that Allen be relieved of command. The official reason was exhaustion. The real reason was spelled out in Bradley's personal diary. Allen has created a division that worships him and ignores everyone else. This cannot be allowed to continue. The 1st Division must learn to function as part of the Army, not as Allen's personal command. Eisenhower agreed. On August 17th, the day Sicily was declared secure, Terry Allen was informed that he was being relieved and sent back to the United States for rest and recuperation. The 1st Infantry Division was devastated. Soldiers who'd survived 2 campaigns, who'd fought Germans from Tunisia to Sicily, broke down and cried. Officers submitted requests to be transferred with Allen. The division newspaper ran a front-page editorial questioning the decision. Someone painted "Bring Back Terry" on the wall of division headquarters in letters 6 feet high. The Army replaced Allen with Major General Clarence Hubner, a capable, professional, by-the-book officer. Hubner immediately implemented proper military discipline. Uniforms would be worn correctly, saluting would be enforced, unit insignias would be standardized. The 1st Infantry Division would become a model of military professionalism. The soldiers hated it. More importantly, they hated fighting without Terry Allen. Between September 1943 and June 1944, the 1st Division participated in the invasion of Italy. Their performance was adequate, professional, competent. They followed orders and took objectives and did everything they were supposed to do. But they weren't the same division. The fire was gone, the aggressiveness that made them dangerous, the willingness to do impossible things because their general convinced them they could. Bradley noticed, Eisenhower noticed, and they started to wonder if they'd made a mistake. Meanwhile, Terry Allen was in the United States, drinking too much and waiting for the Army to decide what to do with him. He was 55 years old. He'd commanded in combat for nearly a year. By any reasonable standard, his career was over. He'd be given a training command, maybe an administrative position, somewhere he couldn't cause trouble. He'd finished the war behind a desk. He made it 6 weeks before he started making phone calls. By October 1943, the Army was preparing for the invasion of France. They needed divisions, they needed commanders, and they needed someone to take the 104th Infantry Division, a National Guard unit from the Pacific Northwest that had been training for 2 years and was still considered unready for combat, and turn them into an assault division in 6 months. Terry Allen volunteered. He didn't ask for a prestigious posting. He didn't demand command of a veteran division. He just wanted to get back into the fight. In November 1943, he took command of the 104th, the Timberwolves, and started doing exactly what he'd done with the Big Red One. He ignored regulations he thought were stupid. He trained his men harder than official doctrine required. He made them believe they were the most dangerous division in the Army. It worked again. The 104th Infantry Division landed in France in September 1944, 3 months after D-Day. Between September and April 1945, they fought across France, Belgium, Holland, and Germany. They liberated 66 towns and cities. They captured 42,000 German prisoners. And they did it with lower casualties than any other American division in theater, because Terry Allen had taught them to move fast, hit hard, and never stop. German intelligence identified the 104th as exceptionally aggressive and warned units to expect immediate and violent response to contact. One captured German officer, when asked about American divisions, said, "We could predict what most of your units would do. We could never predict the Timberwolves. They always attacked, and Terry Allen was everywhere." At 56, then 57, he was the oldest division commander in combat. He lived in the field with his troops. He walked the front lines daily. He made decisions on the spot, based on what he saw, not what headquarters told him. On March 26, 1945, the 104th Division reached the Rhine River at Honnef, Germany. The bridges were destroyed. The far bank was defended. Crossing would require boats, engineers, and careful coordination. The plan called for a 48-hour preparation period. Terry Allen crossed that night with the first assault wave, wading ashore with a rifle company from the 413th Infantry Regiment. He was 57 years old. He had no tactical reason to be there. He crossed because his men were crossing, and Terry Allen had never asked his soldiers to do anything he wouldn't do himself. By dawn, the 104th Division was across the Rhine. Within 3 days, they'd penetrated 15 miles into Germany. Within 2 weeks, they'd reached the Ruhr pocket. And when Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, the 104th was still advancing, still attacking, still following the old man who refused to slow down. After the war, the army tried to figure out what to do with Terry Allen. He was a hero. He'd commanded 2 divisions in combat with extraordinary success. He'd earned 2 Distinguished Service Crosses, 2 Silver Stars, and the respect of every soldier who'd served under him. He'd also been officially relieved once, had a reputation for insubordination that spanned 3 decades, and was considered difficult to work with by almost everyone who'd ever been his superior officer. In 1946, they offered him a training command at Fort Benning, Georgia. It was a demotion in everything but name. Terry Allen accepted without complaint and spent the next 18 months teaching young officers how to lead infantry divisions. He retired in 1947 at the age of 59. His official army photograph shows him in dress uniform, wearing all his decorations, looking directly at the camera with an expression that might be a smile or might be a challenge. The citation accompanying his 2nd Distinguished Service Cross mentions extraordinary heroism and inspired leadership, but never explains why he was relieved of command in Sicily or why his methods were considered problematic. Terry Allen retired to El Paso, Texas. He bought a small house. He didn't write memoirs. He didn't give interviews. He didn't join veterans organizations or attend reunions. When soldiers from the 1st or 104th Divisions tracked him down and asked to visit, he invited them over for beer and told stories. But he never talked about being relieved or about the conflicts with Bradley and Eisenhower. He died on September 12, 1969, at the age of 81. His obituary in the El Paso Times mentioned that he was a retired Army general. It didn't mention Sicily or the Rhine or the 60 Zero soldiers he'd led in combat. The headline read, "Local man, 81, dies." He was buried at Fort Bliss National Cemetery with full military honors. The funeral was attended by 127 veterans from the 1st and 104th Divisions, men who traveled from across the country to say goodbye to terrible Terry. They wore their old unit patches. They saluted the coffin. And when the ceremony ended, they stood in the hot El Paso sun and told stories about the old man who'd convinced them they could do impossible things. In 1984, 15 years after his death, a military historian named Thomas Leahy was researching American division commanders and discovered that Terry Allen's efficiency reports from 1942-1945 contained a strange pattern. Every report written by officers who'd never served under him mentioned deficiencies in military bearing and lack of respect for proper procedure. Every report written by officers who'd commanded alongside him in combat used words like irreplaceable and extraordinary and the finest combat leader I have observed. Leahy interviewed 43 veterans from both of Allen's divisions. All 43 used some variation of the same phrase, "He made us believe we could win." That's what Terry Allen did. He took ordinary men, farm boys and factory workers and clerks, and convinced them they were capable of extraordinary things. Not through speeches or propaganda, but by showing them every day that the impossible was just the difficult that nobody else had tried yet. The army never really understood him. They relieved him, sidelined him, tried to make him fit into systems that couldn't contain him. And after the war, when historians wrote about Sicily and France and Germany, they focused on Patton and Bradley and Eisenhower, the generals who fit the narrative of modern, professional, systematic warfare, but the soldiers remembered. In 2007, the 1st Infantry Division Museum at Fort Riley, Kansas, added a permanent exhibit about Terry Allen. The centerpiece is his battered campaign hat, the one he wore instead of a regulation helmet, the one that drove his superiors crazy and made his soldiers love him. Next to it is a quote from Private Robert Wagner's diary, written in Sicily in July 1943. "That's our general. That's the big red one." The exhibit doesn't mention that he was officially relieved. It doesn't explain why his methods were controversial. It just shows the hat and the quote and lets visitors draw their own conclusions. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. These forgotten stories need people like you to keep them alive. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and leadership from World War II. And drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and if you served, or if someone in your family did. These men deserve to be remembered. Thank you for helping us make sure they are. Terry Allen wasn't forgotten by the men who followed him. He was forgotten by the institution that couldn't figure out what to do with a leader who didn't fit the mold. There's a lesson in that. The best leaders aren't always the ones who follow the rules. Sometimes they're the ones who know which rules deserve to be broken and who are willing to pay the price for breaking them. The Germans called him a nightmare because he attacked when he was supposed to defend, advanced when he was supposed to consolidate, and never ever stopped. His own army called him difficult and insubordinate and relieved him at the height of his success. His soldiers just called him Terrible Terry, and they meant it as the highest compliment they could give, but there's more to the story. Two moments that define what Terry Allen really was, beyond the tactics and the battles and the official reports. Two moments that explain why 127 veterans traveled to El Paso in 1969 to bury a man the army had tried to forget. The first moment happened in Tunisia, 3 months before Sicily, and it wasn't about winning a battle, it was about losing one. April 23rd, 1943. Hill 609, Tunisia. The 1st Infantry Division had been ordered to take a German strongpoint designated Hill 609 on American maps. It was actually a rocky ridgeline that dominated the surrounding valley, held by elements of the 10th Panzer Division with artillery support. The official plan called for a coordinated assault with armor support, artillery preparation, and airstrikes. Terry Allen looked at the plan and saw his men dying for 3 days, while staff officers in Algiers coordinated support that would arrive late or not at all. He'd seen it before. The pattern was always the same. Detailed plans that looked perfect on paper and collapsed the moment real soldiers encountered real Germans. So he did what he always did. He modified the plan. The 18th Infantry Regiment would attack at night without artillery preparation, climbing the ridge from an unexpected direction. Speed and surprise instead of firepower and coordination. It almost worked. The lead battalion made it halfway up the ridge before German machine guns opened fire. The slope was steeper than reconnaissance reported. The rocks were loose. Men trying to climb and fight simultaneously made perfect targets. Within 20 minutes, the attack stalled. Within an hour, the battalion was pinned down, taking casualties, unable to advance or withdraw. At 2:30 a.m., Terry Allen was in a forward command post, listening to radio reports, chain-smoking, watching his plan fall apart. Major General George Patton, commanding 2 Corps, was 60 miles away at Corps headquarters, and he was not happy. The radio crackled with his voice. "Allen, what the hell is happening up there? You said you'd have that hill by midnight." Allen responded in a voice his staff officers described as dangerously calm. "We ran into more resistance than expected. I'm repositioning for another assault." "You're out of position because you ignored the plan," Patton said. "You attacked without proper support. Now you've got a battalion stuck on that hill, and the Germans know exactly where you are." It was all true. Allen had gambled. He'd bet that speed would overcome firepower. He'd been wrong. And now 800 men were trapped on a hillside, running out of ammunition, waiting for him to fix his mistake. He could have called for artillery support, could have waited for daylight and airstrikes, could have done what the manual said to do: consolidate, replan, attack properly with all available assets. Instead, at 3:15 a.m., Terry Allen walked out of the command post, found Captain Marcus Stevenson from the 16th Infantry, and said, "Get your company. We're going up that hill." Stevenson stared at him. "Sir, you're the division commander." "I know what I am. Get your company." What happened next was never mentioned in official reports. 43 men, one understrength rifle company, climbed Hill 609 in darkness, led by a 55-year-old major general who decided that if his plan was going to fail, he'd fail personally, instead of ordering someone else to die fixing his mistake. They reached the pinned battalion at 4:50 a.m. Allen found the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Denholm, in a shell crater treating wounded. Denholm looked up, saw his division commander covered in dust and blood from a shrapnel cut on his forehead, and said, "Sir, what the hell are you doing here?" "Same thing you're doing, getting shot at because I made a bad plan." They held that position until dawn. At 6:20 a.m., with enough light to direct artillery, Allen called in fire missions himself, adjusting based on what he could see. By 8:00 a.m., with air support finally arriving, the ridge was taken. The 1st Infantry Division lost 247 men, taking Hill 609. By any metric, it was a tactical failure. Too many casualties for too little gain. Allen's decision to attack without proper support had been wrong. His decision to personally join the assault accomplished nothing tactically. But every soldier in the 18th Infantry Regiment heard what happened. They heard that when Terrible Terry made a mistake, he didn't blame subordinates or circumstances. He climbed the hill himself. And they decided that they'd follow a general like that anywhere, because he'd never asked them to do something he wouldn't do first. Patton wrote in his diary, "Allen is either the bravest man I know or the craziest, probably both. Division commanders don't belong on assault hills, but his men worship him for it." Bradley wrote in his efficiency report, "General Allen's personal courage is beyond question, but his judgment remains problematic. His tendency to personally participate in small unit actions continues to concern this headquarters." The soldiers of the 1st Infantry Division wrote nothing official. They just remembered. And 3 months later, at Gela, when Terry Allen ordered them to do impossible things, they did those things without hesitation because they knew he'd be there with them. The second moment happened in Germany 2 years later, and it's the one that explains why Terry Allen retired to a small house in El Paso and never talked about the war. April 11th, 1945. Nordhausen, Germany. The 104th Infantry Division was advancing through the Harz Mountains, mopping up isolated German resistance. The war was effectively over. Berlin would fall in 3 weeks, but Terry Allen kept his division moving, kept attacking, because as long as Germans were fighting, American soldiers were dying. And every day the war continued was another day someone's son or husband wouldn't come home. At 2:00 p.m., scouts from the 413th Infantry Regiment reported finding something near the town of Nordhausen. They weren't clear what it was. The radio traffic was confused, disturbed. Allen drove forward to see for himself. What he found was Mittelbau-Dora, a Nazi concentration camp where 60,000 prisoners had been worked to exhaustion, building V-2 rockets in underground factories. By the time the 104th arrived, the SS guards had fled. Most of the prisoners were dead. The ones who survived were skeletal, barely human, unable to speak or move. Terry Allen had fought across 3 continents. He'd seen soldiers torn apart by artillery, burned by flamethrowers, shot through the head by snipers. He'd walked past stacked bodies after every major battle. He thought he understood what war was. Mittelbau-Dora taught him he'd been wrong. Captain James Mitchell from Portland, Oregon, commanding a rifle company in the 413th, found Allen standing outside one of the barracks at 4:30 p.m. The general was 57 years old, 20 months from retirement, the toughest man Mitchell had ever met. He was crying. "Sir?" Mitchell said. Allen wiped his face. His voice was steady when he spoke, but Mitchell heard something broken underneath. Get every medic in the division here. Get every truck. Get every spare ration we have. And get photographers. Get reporters. Get everyone with a camera. Document everything. Because people are going to say this didn't happen, and they need to see that it did. For 3 days, the 104th Infantry Division stopped fighting and became aid workers. Soldiers who'd been trained to kill Germans spent 12-hour shifts feeding survivors, treating wounds, burying bodies. The division medical staff was overwhelmed. Men volunteered their own rations. Someone found a warehouse of German supplies and distributed everything to survivors. Terry Allen was there the entire time. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He walked through the camp, talking to survivors who spoke German or Polish or Russian, trying to understand what had happened. He stood next to the crematorium and counted bodies. He documented everything because he knew that what he was seeing was something history needed to remember. On April 14th, a reporter from Stars and Stripes found him sitting outside the camp, smoking, staring at nothing. "General Allen, can I ask you some questions about the liberation?" "No." "Sir, people should know what your division found here. This is important." Allen looked at the reporter. He was exhausted. His eyes were red. When he spoke, his voice was completely flat. "You want to know what we found? We found out that we were fighting for something. We thought we were fighting because Japan attacked us and Germany declared war. We were wrong. We were fighting because this exists, because human beings did this to other human beings, and we need to make goddamn sure it never happens again." "Can I quote you on that, sir?" "No, write whatever you want. Just make sure you tell people what happened here. Make sure they know." The article ran in Stars and Stripes on April 16th. It quoted anonymous officers from the 104th Division describing the liberation. It showed photographs that made readers sick. It described Terry Allen's division treating survivors with extraordinary compassion and documented the systematic murder of thousands of prisoners. It didn't mention Allen by name. He'd refused to take credit. When the official Army report on Mittelbau Dora was compiled, Terry Allen's name appeared once, in a footnote, stating that the 104th Division liberated the camp on April 11th. But the soldiers remembered, and after the war, when veterans from the 104th gathered for reunions, they didn't talk much about the battles they'd won or the ground they'd taken. They talked about Nordhausen. They talked about the 3 days they spent trying to save people instead of kill them. And they talked about how terrible Terry, the toughest son of a bitch they'd ever met, cried when he saw what human beings could do to each other. In 1958, 13 years after the war, a German historian named Friedrich Kellner was researching Nazi concentration camps. He found the Stars and Stripes article from April 1945 and tracked down veterans from the 104th Division. He interviewed 17 men. All 17 mentioned General Allen. Though Allen wasn't named in the original article, all 17 used similar language. He made sure we treated them like human beings. He told us to remember their names. He cried. Kellner tried to contact Allen for an interview. The letter was returned unopened. Allen's wife answered the phone and said politely that the general didn't give interviews about the war. Kellner wrote in his research notes, "Of all the American officers I have attempted to contact, only General Allen refuses to discuss the liberation of the camps. The veterans speak of him with reverence, but he will not speak of himself. I believe he carries something the others do not. Perhaps it is the weight of command, of knowing that every decision he made killed someone, enemy or friend. Perhaps it is something else." What Kellner didn't know, what nobody knew until Terry Allen's personal papers were donated to the Fort Bliss Museum in 1985, was that Allen wrote letters, hundreds of letters, to the families of every soldier in the 1st and 104th Divisions who died under his command. He wrote them by hand. He included specific details about how their son or husband died. He never mentioned his own role. He never talked about strategy or tactics. He just told them that their soldier had mattered, had fought bravely, had been valued. The museum has 247 of these letters. They estimate Allen wrote at least 300 during and after the war. Some families wrote back thanking him. Most didn't respond. Allen kept writing anyway. One letter, dated December 3rd, 1947, 18 months after his retirement, was to Mrs. Catherine Brennan of Philadelphia, whose son Robert had died at jailer in July 1943. Allen wrote, "Dear Mrs. Brennan, I know this letter comes late, and I apologize. I have been trying to write it for 4 years. Your son Robert was in the first wave at jailer. He made it off the beach and was moving inland when he was hit by machine gun fire. He died quickly. He didn't suffer. I know this because I was there and I saw him fall. I'm writing to tell you that Robert's death was my fault. I gave the orders that put him on that beach. I made the decisions that led to him being in that position at that moment. And I carry that responsibility every day. But I also want you to know that Robert was brave. He moved forward when other men froze. He helped wounded soldiers even while under fire. And in the very short time I saw him in combat, he was everything a soldier should be. I cannot give you back your son. I cannot change what happened. I can only tell you that he mattered, that his sacrifice meant something, and that I will remember him until the day I die. With deepest regret, Terry de la Mesa Allen." Mrs. Brennan never responded. The letter was found in her papers after her death in 1966, carefully preserved in a box with Robert's medals and service records. This was what Terry Allen carried. Not just the glory of victories or the pride of command, the weight of every decision that put soldiers in harm's way, the knowledge that his aggressive tactics saved thousands of lives by ending battles quickly and cost hundreds of lives by putting men in danger before support arrived. The impossible math of command, where every choice kills someone, and the only question is whether you killed fewer than the alternative. He never talked about it. He never sought recognition. He retired to El Paso and lived quietly, carrying his burden alone, writing letters to families of the dead, trying in some small way to acknowledge what his decisions had cost. The army gave him medals. His soldiers gave him loyalty. History will give him recognition as one of the finest combat commanders of World War II. But Terry Allen gave himself something different. The full weight of responsibility for every life lost under his command, and the absolute refusal to pretend it was anything other than what it was. That's what made him different. Not the tactics, not the victories, the willingness to carry the cost personally, completely, without excuse or delegation. To look at Hill 609 and say, "I made a mistake," and then climb the hill to fix it. To look at Nordhausen and recognize evil without flinching. To write 300 letters to grieving families and sign each one with his own hand. The Germans called him a nightmare because he never stopped attacking. His superiors called him difficult because he wouldn't follow rules that would get his men killed. His soldiers called him Terrible Terry because he led from the front and shared every danger. But if you'd asked Terry Allen what he was, he would have given you a different answer. He would have said he was a man who sent other men to die, who made decisions that cost lives, who carried responsibilities that couldn't be shared. And then he would have lit another cigarette and gone back to doing exactly that, because someone had to, and he'd decided it would be him. That's the real story. Not the battles won or the tactics employed, but the cost carried. The price of command that never appears in official reports or efficiency ratings. The burden that Terry Allen shouldered every day of his life and never put down, not even in retirement, not even in death. In the Fort Bliss Museum, next to his battered campaign hat and Private Wagner's diary entry, there's one of those letters. It's displayed behind glass, handwritten on army stationery, dated 1946. The museum doesn't identify which family received it. They just show it as an example of what Terry Allen did after the war, when nobody was watching, when there were no medals or promotions at stake. The last line reads, "I will remember him until the day I die." And he did. All three, there was error of them. Every name, every face, every decision that put them in harm's way. That's what made Terry Allen who he was. Not a hero, not a maverick, just a man who understood the cost of command and paid it in full for the rest of his life.